So I think in the probably the very first podcast, I mentioned a friend went to Japan and ate foods. He was a diabetic, but he went to Japan, ate everything, every sweet, carb, whatever. He did not limit himself, and his blood sugar actually dropped. Well, I just talked to this optometrist, took his whole family to Italy. He is allergic to gluten here in the US, right? And so like he says that his throat will swell up, his ears will get red when he eats gluten here in the US. So when he went to Italy the first 3 days, he didn't try to eat any pasta, pizza, which is, that's why you go to Italy, right? And so he avoided it for 3 days. And then he's like, okay, let me just try it. So he started nipping on a little, a little of their like croutons, a little piece of bread, and no reaction. So he ate a little more, still no reaction. Then he was like, okay, I'm gonna get a pizza. I'm gonna get some pasta, bring it all on. So he was
Yeah.
eating all of that stuff, no reaction.
Yep.
I mean, that's just another, it's just like the food here in the US is being controlled by big food. They're, manipulating these synthetic foods that are no longer foods. So that's why it's so important you have to go organic. You don't have a choice because the food here is terrible, right? It is no longer food. We're eating chemicals. So, I mean, it's
Mhm.
just like everywhere but the US is controlling, how they, manipulate food. We're getting banned by Facebook. Like Facebook's not allowing us to do these podcasts. I don't know why. We'll figure out why, but it could be the information that we're sharing, right? So just FYI. But I just found that interesting that even in
Yeah.
Italy, the food is pure compared to here.
Yes. And I've heard that from so many clients, Jimmy. I can't tell
Yeah,
you how many clients I've heard that from. They go there and they tolerate it fine. They come home, they start eating the breads and stuff here, and they totally flare up.
yeah,
And of course, even here in the US, what we know is that they spray it with glyphosate, right? Roundup. And it's done prior to harvesting so that they can get it all dead at once. So they can harvest it all at once. And so it's really saturated with glyphosate. That's a huge part of it. The other thing is it's not your original heritage wheat. So if you look back on pictures in the 1800s, the wheat was it was as tall as people were, right? It was hugely tall. The hybridized. Now it's real short. It's about the tall as your knee. And they've increased the gluten content in the wheat. It's accelerated because what do we want in the US? What do we ask for? White, fluffy bread,
yeah.
We don't want this hard wheat that's, brown. We want all this white, fluffy stuff. So they've changed the wheat incredibly. So in Europe and in Italy, I've heard this from so many people, it's heritage wheat. It is the original wheat and it's not sprayed. They don't allow them to spray glyphosate there. So big difference in food quality, like you said, here in the US. And unfortunately, big ag and all those things run everything. So here we are. And even if you eat organic wheat here in the US, you're going to find that it's still hybridized. It can be hybridized and called organic. The closest to heritage wheat would be something called Eichhorn wheat.
Hmm.
It's EIKHORN, I believe. Eichhorn wheat is starting to be growing here. You can order it online. Of course, you have to make your own bread. I don't think too many people are doing that, but that's an option if you want to do that. But very good point on that. And then I will say something on the ketogenic diet. I had a client, this is about 6 or 7 months ago, come to me, and she had been on the keto diet for 3 years, never stopped. She said she was almost like ADD with it, right? She was just obsessed, kicked her into diabetes because every time she tried to add in any carbohydrates, her blood sugar would go, her pancreas didn't even know what to do with it anymore. It didn't understand what a carb was. It just was overreacting to everything. So she's now a diabetic. So I caution people. We've been able to gradually, get her to add in a little bit more carbs at a time, but we've had to really, and it's been we're working on probably 8 or 9 months now. And of course, she gained some weight and that really bothered her. And I said, well, it's going to happen until we get things stabilized and metabolically get you your body working the way it was supposed to work. But that is the caution I give people on women, especially going keto for long periods of time, short periods of time. And as you said, not the bacon and sausage keto. That is the worst. And, you know, or eating like the Atkins diet you talked about on the last podcast, right? It was butter and cheese and meat and, you know, oh my gosh, terrible. So caution on that. You can go lower carb for a period of time. So that leads me into talking about carbs, because this was a question we had in our private Facebook group this week with the course that we were running. How many carbs a day should I eat? We don't tell people in our programs how much to eat. And that really kind of shocked people in the beginning. They were like, well, what's the serving size? I think we've gotten so used to somebody telling us, okay, you can have a half a cup of this or whatever. And our focus is, if you're eating real food, you're going to be satiated. You'll reach a point of satiation. And we're not eating foods that you can overeat on, like white rice, like you said. So how many carbs was a question that we got for them transitioning out of our program. So that's a great question. And of course, the answer is, like you said in the Facebook group, Jimmy, nobody likes to hear, it depends. Right? It depends. If you're insulin resistant, if you're diabetic and you're really struggling with blood sugar numbers, it's going to be different than someone like you or me, right? You show pictures of you guys eating out, and you're probably having rice because you're eating at Asian restaurants, right? Yeah. So it depends. I can eat white potatoes or sweet potatoes or whatever, because I don't have to worry about my weight, and I don't have to worry about my blood sugar numbers. So it's a very different number for someone like you or me versus someone really struggling with blood sugar numbers. So I will say this though, there is a sweet spot that I usually find that most people can do, but the carbs again have to come from plants. Okay. Because when I say this number, you can't go out and drink a Coke. Okay, 100 grams a day is a pretty sweet spot for even those that are insulin dependent. And that number is going to be complex carbohydrates. All right, so 100 grams of carbs from complex carbohydrates. So that goes back to a sweet potato or a butternut squash. Is, you know, I love butternut squash or acorn squash or those kinds of things, really full of fiber, obviously rich in antioxidants because of the color. Even an apple, like you said, with the fiber in an apple, a lot of pectin in an apple, very high in fiber, but you put some clothes on it. So you're going to put some clothes on that apple. You're going to have some, you know, a piece of goat cheese with it, or you're going to have some peanut butter with it or something like that, and slow that carbohydrate response into the body. But if I find with my clients, I've got those who want to track everything. They want to know the app. They want to track everything. Now I have those that are like, I don't want to track anything. I don't want you to tell me how many grams of carbs they have. So, you know, everybody's different, right? Some people find it, they geek out on the you know, tracking carbs and stuff, which if you're a diabetic and you're on insulin, you probably have to. But your average person, if you're eating real food, and I'll say this, you know, oftentimes to my clients, or even into, you know, in our Facebook group, is, you know, when you start to crave food, like if you're craving sweets, you can very easily overeat sweets, very easily eat 5 or 6 cookies or whatever. But if you're craving sweets and your only option is to sit down and have some salmon and some broccoli, do you think you're going to overeat that? Probably not. It's really hard to overeat real food. So you're going to be full, and you know, you're not going to overeat. So we have a world that has grocery store aisles that are completely committed to cereal boxes. You can well overeat a box of cereal. You can sit down and eat a whole box of cereal, right? I mean, people can overeat cereal really easily. So those are the kind of carbs that you really have to stay away from for long-term health, and stick with your real carbs from even the fruits that we talked about, and the carbs from the plants, the legumes, you know, the beans, the lentils, those kinds of things are wonderful carbohydrates. And then once you get stabilized with your blood sugar, once you get at a good weight, like Jimmy and I, we can have some carbohydrates. Like if you want your rice with your Chinese food or whatever, your body can tolerate it. But I bet you're not eating that rice all by itself. You're eating it with some protein and some vegetables, right? So that's the key. That's the key.
And so when I eat out, obviously I eat here. So no one's perfect. And I tell our patients, and the patients that I've treated that, my strategy is this: 5 days a week, I will eat perfect. Because I love to eat, but 5 days out of the week, I will eat perfect. And then on the weekends, if I want to go out, I go out and I eat. Now we eat
Hmm.
rice is a staple of the Asian culture. So
Right.
but we don't eat white rice. So what we eat is we use brown rice, purple rice, wild rice. Now we have a rice cooker that
Hmm.
turns that brown rice into what's called GABA rice. And basically what that is it cooks the rice so well that it extracts all of the brown rice, the nutrition from that brown rice, right? And that brown rice or purple rice or wild rice, it does not spike your blood sugar like white rice would. Uh, there's a couple of things I wanted to add about, that question about carbs. So here's a couple of other ways that, that I would suggest as well. If you're going to eat sweets, right? You want to, let's say you can't, you just want to cheat, okay? And you cheat. If you're going to get some cookies, eat one cookie. Eat one cookie and then drink some water and then wait about 15 minutes, right? The reason why we tend to overeat is because we're eating faster than like we're eating so much, but it's taking some time for the sugar to get into our bloodstream and for it to register in our brain. And then our brain knows, oh, I ate too much. Well, by that time, you've already eaten 20 cookies, right? So if you just eat one cookie and just wait 10 to 15 minutes, and let your brain calibrate that and say, hey, do I have enough? Right. So that's one way. Another way, for those of like you said, some people like to track everything. I love the glucometer. You're testing your blood sugar. Now
Yeah.
there's some constant glucose monitor. They're a little more expensive, but you can get these glucometers, which you don't have to be a diabetic to get it. So
No.
what you can do is you buy these and then the strips, and you buy these little strips. Yes, you got to prick your finger, but what you can do is you can, before, let's say you're testing out how much carbs should I eat, right? You could test your blood sugar before you eat, and then about ideally 2 hours after you eat, but you can do it an hour later, test your blood sugar again. You can do that by testing your carbs. So if your blood sugar shoots beyond 150 after you've eaten, then that's too much carbs for you. So you can track it that way too. So that's a more, I like to say, a more scientific way to track instead of measuring, because the measuring that people give, like all over the website, oh, whether it's how many ounces of carbs, grams per carbs per body weight and stuff like that, that doesn't necessarily is not necessarily accurate, because everybody processes carbs differently at different rates. So it doesn't matter you weigh the same. You could be completely different for someone who weighs the same as you, right? And so
Mm.
using the glucometer, that lets you know how fast you're processing carbs. Yes, your finger is going to be hurting if you prick yourself a lot, but that's one of the better ways that you can know how much carbs you actually need. And here's another thing, I'm going to, complicate it even more. It will change from day to day. So that's why, I recommend using the glucometer if you really want something to measure.
And exercise, if you're exercising one day and not the next, that would make a difference,
Oh, huge,
right?
huge.
Huge difference. We had a question. Somebody wanted to know where to get that rice cooker that you're talking about.
The rice cooker, you can get it on the Amazon. It's it's
Okay.
it's it's this uh it's an elephant brand. I forgot what it's called, like Z something. I'll Google it while you're talking.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we just have a couple minutes left. And I really do like your tips there on the carbs. It makes a big difference. Everybody's metabolically different, right? So we're not all metabolically the same. But think about a 6'5" guy, that weighs 250 in solid muscle versus a little petite 5'2" woman. Your carbohydrates are going to be completely different, for those guys. So really you have to look at the individual person